Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar on the 11 ways to jumpstart your contractor qualification program. Browse provides supplier and contractor qualification and management solutions. Our mission is to give you visibility into your supply chain and ensure that you're working with safe, qualified, and socially responsible contractors. We've helped companies for over 14 years, and we've learned a lot during that time. And that's what we want to share with you today. My name is David Askvik. I'll be your host. Before we begin, I want to cover a few logistics. As a reminder, you are in listen-only mode. This presentation will last about 40 minutes, and we will have a time for questions at the end of the presentation. I encourage you to log in through your computer and make sure that you can send in any questions. There's a Q&A button at the top that you can click on to send in questions at any time during the presentation. With that, I would like to introduce our presenter for the day, and that's Brett Armstrong. He's a vice president here at Browse, and he's been with Browse for over 10 years, and he's had experience managing teams that have supported the world's leading organizations during the implementation and ongoing management of supply chain qualification programs. During this time, Brett has documented key activities that ensure success and help you jumpstart your contractor pre-qualification program. That is, whether you're managing the program in-house or you're working with a third-party provider. So with that, I'd like to pass the time over to you, Brett. Go ahead and take it away.
Great. Thanks, David. First of all, I appreciate everyone taking the time to join us today. As I was reviewing a list of those in attendance, we've got a wide variety of organizations who've joined us today, a number of utilities, a number in the mining space, and manufacturing, with some fantastic representation from multiple departments, including safety, procurement, and operations. Before we get started, I want to step back for just a moment and create a baseline that we can all work from for today's discussion. When you start to talk about compliance or qualification, those are very broad terms, and it's easy to get lost in those conversations without a framework to work from. Before I do that, there are three terms today that I'll be using interchangeably. Those terms, realizing that they're very different in nature, the conversation today is very applicable to each. Those terms are supplier, contractor, and vendor. And as we go through our discussion, we'll be talking about ways that you can implement a qualification program that is specific to each of those three areas of your business. So what is supply chain qualification? Let's step back for just a minute and talk about the traditional definition of pre-qualification. That definition, by nature, would be the screening of potential contractors, suppliers, or vendors for the purpose of creating a bid list. Now at Browse, we've expanded beyond pre-qualification when we talk about these types of programs. When you think about the traditional definition of pre-qualification, it could easily indicate that this is something that was just being done one time, up front, prior to awarding a bid. At Browse, it's been our experience that organizations who are most effective in these types of programs continue to look at compliance over a period of time. We use the term that compliance is more than a one-time event. And so we really focus on the ongoing qualification as well as the pre-qualification of your supply chain members. And that's something that I would encourage you to consider, whether you're thinking of working with a third party or whether you're planning to manage this program in-house. Be prepared to monitor and manage those documents that may expire. One great example would be insurance. Unfortunately, we've heard far too many times that an organization goes through the pre-qualification program. They're provided with all the documentation that's been requested, including a valid insurance certificate, only to find that 30 days in to a bid, into a project, a contractor or supplier will cancel that policy to save themselves a little extra money, cutting corners. Unfortunately, in that situation, if there is an accident or, heaven forbid, a fatality, at that point, the hiring organization, that enterprise business who brought them on to perform the work, they're potentially left being liable. And they've really got no recourse outside of litigation. So why is supply chain qualification important? It really goes back to the old adage that you can't measure, or you can't manage what you can't measure. More importantly, you need to be able to clearly articulate exactly where your supply chain stands specific to your qualification standards. Albert Einstein had a fantastic quote that I love. He said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. As organizations create these qualification programs, they need to think about ways in which they will share the data. One thing that we're finding is that modern qualification no longer involves just a single department, but it touches multiple facets of the business. That's why today on our webinar, we've got representation again from safety, from procurement, as well as operations. And we even find the executive team becoming more and more involved. And so being able to not only manage and measure the qualification status of the contractors, suppliers, and vendors that you work with, but being able to share that information in a simple and concise way across all interested departments is really critical. There's 3 statistics up on your screen right now that I think really articulate the importance of these types of qualification programs. Our focus on this slide is safety, but there are multiple metrics across really every department that is seen as a stakeholder in this program that would clearly articulate how successful organizations are when they implement a qualification program. Here you can see that for contractors and suppliers that are managed inside of Browse, historically we've found that they outperform their peers by 13% when looking at experience modification rates. 24% better when you look at lost time incident rates, and 27% better when looking at recordable incident rates. So again, when you've got this type of program in place, you're encouraging your contractors and suppliers to perform at their very best. If you're not holding your supply chain accountable, you're really not encouraging them to perform at their best. There's no way to recognize those who are at the top of their game. You know, one way to look at this, I guess, would be to think about a team of highly trained athletes. As a coach, you get everybody together and you tell the team, hey, just go out to the field and play, have a good time. We're not going to worry about score today. Without some way to measure the success of those you're working with, again, it's very difficult to reward those who are performing to their very highest potential and ultimately bringing success to you as an organization. Now that we have a common understanding of what contractor qualification is and why pre-qualification by itself isn't enough, I want to talk about some ways that you can jumpstart your qualification program, whether you're managing that in-house or whether you're looking to work with a third party. I think the first thing, it's very important to be realistic. One of the most common questions that I get asked is, what are the potential impacts to my team if I choose to implement a qualification program on my own? Or in other words, what kind of staffing requirements do I need? I have a few estimates based on our experience that I'd like to share with you, just to give you a sense of what is really entailed when you create a qualification program that spans more than one department. Again, modern qualification is no longer focused on just one department, but it spans multiple areas of a business. Now, oftentimes when we're asked to come in and work with an organization, that initial point of contact is procurement or safety. But what we more commonly find is that once we get past those initial discussions, we now sit around the table with 4 or 5, maybe 6 other departments who also have a vested interest in qualification. So to give you an idea, some of what you can anticipate if you choose to implement this type of a program in-house, again, looking at the requirements of multiple departments, you can plan on 1 hour a year per contractor just explaining your requirements. especially if this is a new implementation, something that you're doing for the first time. At that point, we're talking about a change that's very significant to the contractors, suppliers, and vendors that you work with. They may be used to just doing business on a handshake. They're going to have questions. Why now are you requiring this additional documentation of me? You can plan on 2 hours a year answering questions specific to compliance, and then holding those contractors, suppliers, and vendors accountable. These programs are only as effective as the enforcement behind them. And that really means getting the buy-in from all of the interested parties in your organization. We're going to talk more about that. Who should be involved and what are their most common points of interest? You can plan on 1.5 hours a year per contractor, collecting documentation, another 1.5 hours a year, entering that data into your spreadsheets or database or software that you're using so that it can be appropriately tracked. 2 hours validating the data. This is looking at third-party databases, validating the information that has been submitted. And then 2 hours monitoring the data for expiration. Now that assumes that you don't have a system in place to monitor those key data points, specifically items that have data expirations. And then 1.5 to 2 hours a year coordinating with other departments, unless you've got a way to share this across the organization. In total, you're looking at 12 hours per year per contractor. Now, assuming that the average individual works 2,080 hours per year, that works out to 1 full-time employee for every 173 contractors. Now, let's assume that we're very aggressive and we're able to get those hours down to 7 hours per contractor per year. At that point, you'll need 1 full-time employee for every 300 contractors, suppliers, or vendors that you work with in order to proactively monitor compliance and make sure that you're addressing the needs of every department who's typically involved in these types of processes. Which leads us to the next question. Who is typically involved or interested in a qualification program? It's very important that you understand that every stakeholder is going to have a different priority. What we've typically found is that procurement is interested in simplified sourcing, accessing information quickly, maintaining consistent data across all divisions, geographies, and ensuring business continuity, and ultimately making sure that these organizations that are being hired can perform the work at hand and validate that they're financially viable, that there's stability there. The very worst situation would be that a contractor is brought on board to perform a project only to find out that they go bankrupt 30 days in or shortly after being awarded the bid. On the safety side, safety is interested in both leading and lagging indicators. This might include historical safety stats, employee level training. They're interested in monitoring violations and citations, looking at site induction training and other employee-related training. Operations, they're typically going to be interested in how these types of programs are going to be managed. They want real-time access to the data that's collected and scored. They want a single source for that data without having to look across multiple databases or systems. And they want consistent operating procedures, especially if we're talking about the gate entry verification. If you have a secure site, it's very important that this information is available to the guard so that they can protect your organization at those secure facilities. And then the executive team. Let's be honest, they want it all, everything that we've talked about, but they're also concerned about brand equity, demonstrating corporate social responsibility, anti-corruption, and legal compliance. And so, as you can see, we step back and have a number of interested parties at the table. To jumpstart your qualification program, it's absolutely critical that you understand what the challenges are that each of these departments face, that you're able to plan in such a way that you support the program to address every one of those organizational concerns. At that point, you really start to get buy-in. buy-in is just critical when we talk about how we're going to implement these types of programs, which brings us to the definition of contractor accountability. How are you going to hold your contractors, suppliers, and vendors accountable to this type of a program? Stephen Covey, he talked a lot about win-win, but one of my favorite statements, he said, thinking win-win isn't about being nice, nor is it a quick fix technique. It's a character-based code for human interaction and collaboration. When qualification is best implemented, it helps to raise the integrity and the quality of both the client organization as well as the contractor organization. One of the things that we hear from contractors that they appreciate the most about these types of programs is the fact that it levels the playing field. Those contractors that you want to work with, they're the same ones that are going to invest in safety, in ensuring that their business has the appropriate insurance levels that you've requested, and they know that there are others out there that cut corners. And so for them, when these programs are enforced, this is where the cream really rises to the top. The very best that you work with will appreciate these programs because it recognizes the hard work and dedication that they put in to meeting your criteria. So what types of programs are most commonly included in a qualification program? This is the Browse pyramid of qualification assessments. Hopefully it gives a sense of some of the most common data points or question sets that we manage for our contractors and the clients that they are employed by. It starts with insurance. Most organizations want to have certainty that the contractors and suppliers they're working with are insured, looking at legal standards, making sure that there are no past debarments in place, business continuity, health and safety, quality systems, as I mentioned earlier, financial stability. And this is one area where we have really found great success. Browse has recently integrated with Experian in evaluating the financial stability of contractor and supplier organizations, diversity requirements. And then at the top of the pyramid, as I mentioned before, corporate social responsibility and sustainability. This is really an area that is getting a lot of attention when it comes to qualification. And I hate to admit it, but as a country here in the U.S., we really have fallen behind a lot of the initiatives that are in place in Europe and other areas outside of the U.S. And so we're playing a little bit of catch-up. So it's exciting for us to see the amount of attention that those types of programs are getting when it comes to qualification standards. Let's take just a minute and talk a little bit about insurance requirements. If you are just starting to look at implementing a qualification program, or you already have something in place, we're often asked, what types of requirements should I enforce? And while there's no single recommendation, the one thing I'll say, you really need to step back and be working with your risk and legal team to determine what's appropriate for your business. But that being said, there are a few common standards that we see, and I'll touch on those just briefly. If there's any more interest in covering this topic in more detail, we'd be happy to connect with you after this particular presentation and put you in touch with one of our professional services experts. Specific to insurance, we see that most organizations are going to at least require an effective general liability policy. That policy must provide additional insured endorsements for the GL specific to your organization's needs. In terms of the coverage, the sum of the GL policy, each occurrence and excess umbrella limits must be at least $1 million. Organizations are also requiring that their contractors and suppliers provide an auto liability policy. Obviously, that needs to have a valid expiration date. The limits, again, need to be discussed internally, but need to be clearly communicated to the contractors and suppliers that you work with. And then also making sure that there's an effective workers' compensation policy in place. Beyond that, it's my recommendation and something that we feel is absolutely critical if you're managing certificates of insurance, please make sure that those that you hire include you as a certificate holder on the policy. This is going to help protect you in the event that that policy is ever changed. If it were to be canceled, if the limits were to be changed, the broker at that point would be required to notify you as a certificate holder so that you can proactively reach out to the contractor, supplier, or vendor that you're employing and find out why those changes have been made and be able to manage the risk. Safety statistics. Again, most organizations are at least requiring 1 year's annual safety stats. How actively they use that varies. I recently attended a conference here about 2 weeks ago, and I was having a conversation with a safety professional, and they said to me, Brett, the one thing that I really wish was happening is that we were being included in the procurement process up front. They explained that one of the biggest challenges they face is that procurement would oftentimes identify the contractor organization that they wanted to do business with, only to find after the bid had been awarded that there had been a fatality in the past, or that in looking at the trends of their safety statistics, this was not a good safety risk for that organization. So again, getting buy-in from all the stakeholders is really critical here. Our recommendation is that every organization should be collecting a minimum of 4 years historical safety statistic data. Again, looking at trends. It's one thing to have an organization that you've hired have poor safety performance 1 year. It's another thing to be able to step back and say, yes, there was a deficiency here, and certainly not something we want to see, but we can see the improvement year over year. Then you can work with them to make sure that there's an action plan in place to help them achieve your standards. In addition to that, and actually I'll go back, you should plan to collect that by March 31st each year. The information's available. You want to make sure that that is current and up to date. Organizations are also looking at total lost workday cases, total recordable cases, total restricted cases, OSHA 300 and 300A, and then total fatality cases, making sure that they don't have anything specific to a fatality in the prior year. Again, having that trending data to look at, it's going to tell a much better story than just looking at a single year's worth of data. Moving away from lagging indicators, many organizations are looking for monthly reporting. This is something that we've really seen change in the recent years as we work with some of the world's largest enterprise organizations. And then for those contractors and suppliers that present the highest level of risk based on the work type or the work that they perform, putting in place policies to audit safety programs, and then following that up where appropriately with management system audits. Stepping back, not just saying, hey, let's look at the programs, but what evidence is there that you have actually got these programs in place? Again, it's one thing to see on paper, it's another thing to see those programs actually implemented within a contractor organization. I love this slide. Great image there. When we think about risk, it's really important that as the employing organization, we stop making assumptions about how your contractors will go about their work. You need to be very deliberate in asking what's involved. Be specific and ask the questions and require documentation to validate that, the type of work that they're doing. Are you asking the questions, do your services you provide require the use of a boom crane, a cherry picker, mobile equipment, ladders, or scaffolds? Again, it's too easy to assume that none of those things apply. Let's step back and be very deliberate as part of our assessment of our contractors and suppliers and ask those questions. Additional examples of questions that could be asked. Do the services you provide require issuance of a high hazard permit? For example, hot work, confined space, or other hazardous activities? Or do the services you provide require a permit or written job safety analysis or job hazard analysis? All great questions as you really start to get to know your supply chain. And then being sure that you've got a mechanism in place to record that information and then follow it up on the work site. Is the information that's been presented accurate? Licenses. We talked a little bit about insurance, the expirations that go along with them. Another key focal point when we talk about data that expires is licensure. Does the contractor have the appropriate contractor business license in place? What about professional or occupational licenses? And you know, that's specific not only to the contractor organization, but what about the employees that they're bringing on site? How do you know that they have the appropriate licensing themselves? Moving on to another requirement we talked about a little bit earlier of great interest to procurement, but financial stability. If you're awarding work, you better know they'll be around tomorrow. There are a lot of great providers out there that can help you assess the financial stability of the contractors that you're planning to hire. For Browse, we decided to enter into a relationship with Experian. One of the things that we really felt like they brought to the table was that relationship with the smaller, I'll say ma and pa contractor organizations. They're not the big conglomerates providing contracting services, but the smaller organizations, it's even more important that you understand the financial viability of those organizations, and Experian has some great data to assist in that process. At the top of the pyramid that we discussed, you've got corporate social responsibility. This is really, again, an area where I feel like many organizations can improve upon, especially here in North America and outside of the U.S. As I mentioned earlier, this is at the top of the list for many executives, and the questions come up, okay, I understand this is important, but where do I start? What questions, what assessments should I have in place to make sure that my organization is buttoned up? Just to give you a few examples, things that you can be looking at. Looking at voluntary employment standards, child labor, freedom of association, work environment, anti-corruption. Those are just a handful of assessments that every organization should be concerned with. When you think about it, anyone who comes on site, if they were to be found to be non-compliant in one of those areas, it likely isn't going to be the contractor that violated those that get reported in the news, but instead the larger enterprise organization. They're the ones that will take the heat here. And it's absolutely critical, not only in doing the right thing as a global citizen, but in terms of protecting your organization, that those questions are being asked. So what if you already have a program in place and you feel like you're being effective with your qualification program today? What else should you be doing? It's really critical here that we're all very forward-thinking, trying to find ways that we can expand the scope and make sure that we're as buttoned up as we possibly can be. Some of the new trends that we're seeing are employee-level management, ensuring that not only the contractors are compliant, but also their employees are compliant, that they have the appropriate training in place, that they understand the expectations that you have for them as they conduct business on your site. Integrating time and attendance, again, gate entry, making sure that anybody comes on site, that their compliance status is tied into that badging process if you have one, making sure, again, that not only the contractor, but the employee is compliant to your standards. auditing capabilities. Are you prepared to go in and audit those contractors that present the highest level of risk to your business to ensure that not only the paper that has been provided, but the actual work habits meet your requirements? Mobile strategy. This is a topic that we've heard more and more over the years. With every organization, you've got employees that are out on site, that are doing work. They're not behind their desk, but they want to have the ability to view this information. And so that's one thing that needs to be considered. How do you share this with those members of your own team that are not behind the desk that need this data? And if anyone's interested, we do have a new mobile application. Browse announced a mobile strategy during the month of April that is helping organizations expand the way that their employees interact with this data. Now, before I move on, I want to just touch on one thing. Here in the next slide, I'm going to be making a special offer, something that we haven't done in the past, but many organizations have asked us, is there a way that you could sit down with us and help us evaluate what we're doing today? And certainly, that's an area where we'd love to help. We've got some fantastic resources. So in just a minute, I'm going to be talking about an offer that we'll provide to anybody who's attending today's webinar, a chance to sit down with one of our professionals, and we can advise you of some best practices. Before I do that, I just wanted to cover the 11 things we've talked about today that can help you jumpstart your qualification program. The first, be realistic. Be realistic in what you can accomplish and the resources that you have available to you. Know your stakeholders. Not only understanding which departments should be involved in this type of a program, but understanding what's important to them. Make sure that you define your contractor accountability. How are you going to enforce this type of a program? Key insurance requirements, safety statistics. Have you defined what those statistics are? Understanding the risk that a contractor organization presents to you. Are you asking the right questions to understand the way that they'll operate when they're actually on your site? Licensing, making sure that all the documentation is in place, and having a way to manage the ongoing compliance of anything tied to an expiration, such as insurance or a license. Financial stability, making sure that those organizations are viable, that they'll be around tomorrow, a month from now, 6 months from now after they've been awarded work. Corporate social responsibility, and being forward-thinking in the way that you approach qualification moving forward. Now, as I mentioned, if any of you are interested in sitting down with a qualification professional, somebody who can help you evaluate your current program, for the first 3 individuals or organizations that email me here at this email address with the subject line qualification offer, I'd be happy to put you in touch with one of our professional services members and safety professional who can sit down with you. They'll take about an hour, try to understand what you're doing, and talk about areas that you could potentially improve upon. David, with that, I'm going to turn the time back over to you. I think we've had a few questions come through that I've seen.
All right. Thanks, Brett. So at this point, we'd like to turn the time over to questions. Just so you know, at the top right of your screen, there should be a Q&A button, and that's how you can send in questions. I'd like you to think about maybe what you're doing today in terms of managing and qualifying your contractors, and think about challenges you faced over this presentation, and this would be a great time to get some of those questions answered. All right. Had a few come in. Let's start here. Brett, in your opinion, which function is best to manage this program? Procurement, EHS, or quality? So I think referring to stakeholders.
Okay. Great question. You know, again, I think this depends, David, on the organization themselves, the culture of that business. Again, for us, most commonly we get involved by way of an introduction, either through procurement or safety. At one time, I'll say 10 years ago, the majority of these programs were initiated by the safety department, but we're really seeing that change on a daily basis. We get requests from multiple departments, and so it's very difficult for me to pinpoint and say, hey, it's best managed here. Instead, my response would be that it's best managed when the organization partners together to understand everyone's challenges and make sure that they address it across the entire company, not just through a single silo. That's when I've seen the programs be most successful.
Thanks. All right, how do you overcome the issue of contractors not wanting to participate in a program or submit data?
Another really good question. You know, I think specific to contractor participation, it's about setting the expectation, helping to educate them as to why you're doing this. When they start to see the benefits, again, of that equal playing field of being recognized for their efforts, it's been my experience that the organizations that you want to work with, they're the ones that are going to be most willing to jump in and get involved. You will have contractors and suppliers that elect not to participate, but that's really the point of this type of program, is identifying those that may not meet your standards. And you can do that one of two ways, either through the actual assessment of the data that's provided, or in some cases, the contractors and suppliers will self-select and opt out of doing business. Hopefully that answered the question.
All right. Again, as a reminder, you can submit questions to the QA button. Looks like we have a couple left, but again, if you have questions, please submit them. All right, this one, we have our own program. What are the advantages to using a third party? Will they have problems understanding our suppliers?
Yeah. You know, based on my experience, I think there are a few real advantages to working with a third party. The first just comes down to specialization. When you're working with a third-party provider such as Browse, this is what we do day in, day out. We're working with organizations all over the world, and so we can bring best practices to the table to help to educate you to assessments or criteria that you may not have considered up to this point. I think another, again, it goes back to that very first slide, being realistic in terms of what you can accomplish. Based on some of those metrics that we went through, I think it's difficult for an organization to be able to dedicate the appropriate resources to manage this type of program, certainly at the depth that we talked about. You know, when you figure the number of stakeholders that are involved, when you work with a third party, in most cases, there's a shared fee model in place where the contractors will pay a fee in addition to that client organization. And with that, you've got expanded resources that you may not have access to as the employer yourself. And then I think the third one, and this is really big, is the software that is brought to the table, being able to monitor that data. Without the appropriate software in place to help monitor and manage the data, it really can be a challenge. All too often, I still hear stories about organizations that are working either out of filing cabinets or spreadsheets. And so I feel like that is definitely one area where working with a third-party provider really becomes a very effective strategy.
Great. Did want to answer some of the questions. We will be providing the slides and also a recording of the webinar following this webinar, so I just wanted to answer that up front. One last question. What are the 2 to 3 most important items you would recommend we track on contractors?
Well, you know, I'm thinking back to the pyramid and everything that we covered. It's very, very difficult to say, you know, here's 1 or 2. but I think I would have to go back to looking at trending historical safety statistics, financial stability, and insurance coverage. Those would be the three that if somebody said to me, I don't know where to start, what direction would you point me? Those would be the three areas that I would highly recommend or include it in every qualification program. That's really the first step in helping to mitigate the risk and make sure that your organization is protected. So that's where I would start.
All right. Well, if you do have questions, any remaining questions, feel free to email Brett. Also visit our website, browse.com, to learn more. And make sure you watch for the email. We're going to send a follow-up email with slides and the recording of this presentation. Again, if with Brett's offer about having one of our experts really look at what you're doing today and offer best practices, please email Brett and take us up on that offer. With that, Brett, unless you have anything else, we'll close it for today.
No, that's it. I appreciate everyone's participation. Hopefully, we've been able to share a few nuggets that you can take back and implement within your own programs. If you do have any further questions, please reach out to me or another member of the Browse team. We'd be happy to assist in any way that we can.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.